With this Birds on Powerlines podcast, we're back to talking about Doctor Who, as we enjoy the first series with ncutigatwa's 15th Doctor and Millie Gibson as his companion, Ruby Sunday. So listen in to find out what we were thinking about after watching the first 4 episodes, Space Babies, Devil's Chord, Boom, and 73 Yards. We'd also love it if you shared your thoughts about the season in the comments, so we can continue the discussion online. I think when we started watching Space Babies, I was kind of taken aback. For me, it really was a huge contrast from what we had just seen with the 60th anniversary special and the Christmas special. So I needed to think on it, right? So there was a few things that I really was, thinking about. My immediate impressions was, wow, this was completely wacky. And I just wasn't quite sure what to make of it. And the other thing that I was thinking is that it felt really forced. I kind of felt that they were trying to make out with the Doctor and Ruby to be best buds right away. But I mean, from my perspective, they still just met each other. So it's going to take a while for them to actually have a rapport. So I felt it was a little, in terms of that, it felt a little bit forced. And then the other thing that was distracting me, because these are distractors, right, from the story. So this forced feeling between the friendship and making them best buds right away. And then the other thing that was a distractor for me really was the explanation that was happening. Right. And I mean, I think I know why that is. I mean, I think he said multiple times that he's a time lord and that he doesn't have a family and all of this and sort of where his backstory is. And it wasn't just once, it was several times. And I'm guessing that the purpose is for explanation for people who have, no familiarity with Doctor Who at all. And I get it, and I totally get it, but I found it a little distracting. Not that I've been watching Doctor Who for years. I mean, you and I have not been doing that. So, and it's perfectly possible that all of a sudden somebody's going to be completely new to Doctor Who and would be watching this. But that said, there were some things that even on the, immediate thoughts really stood out to me that I just loved. And I just fell in love with that idea with the snowflakes. And how they were like memories somehow. And that whole, like, it even gives me chills thinking about it, because I just thought that was such a cool thing, that these snowflakes were coming down and memories were somehow being manipulated or changed somehow. And that whole thing with Ruby's mother, on that Christmas Eve night and seeing the Doctor and pointing at him, really gives me something or gives us, or I'm guessing everyone, the feeling that there's something going on, right? And then that whole thing at the end with the Doctor scanning her DNA. And then the other little thing where there was little emotional flashes that the Doctor would be having. I mean, on the outside, he's bubbly and excited, but I still feel like there's something behind him. There's still this angst or something he's sort of hiding. And that was coming out well. So, kudos to the acting. And then again, that feeling for the boogeyman, right? Like he wanted to save him at the end because he was the only one of his kind in all of this. So these are all little things that really stood out to me, even though I was distracted with things. And I felt kind of conflicted on whether did I really enjoy this episode or not, because I wasn't sure. And the entire time, and as you know, I kept saying to you that this episode is reminding me of something, and in over, the last few hours and overnight, I was thinking, I'm guessing that this is a nostalgia episode. So I needed to find out what it was reminding me of, because something about little creatures being cute. And then, yes, I just finally it came back to me. It's the adipose. I don't know if I'm hitting it correctly, but that's what this is reminding me of. And that episode, I had to look it up because I was thinking, I think this was a David Tennant episode where I saw these cute little things. And what were they again? And yes, it's the adipose from the new Doctor Who season 4, episode 1 with David Tennant and Catherine Tate. So I am guessing that this is a total throwback to that, because that was tickling my memory through that entire episode. So so now I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. And I mean, people who are really into Doctor Who and know the whole history, there may be other backstory to this, but that came out. And then the other thing about at the end where he's going to go talk with Ruby's mom, Carla, and he's like, oh, please don't let her slap me. So that was, so I had a good laugh at that, because I know that is sort of a history thing. And the other thing that I loved about the cinematography was the way they did the video of them being in the basement or in the lower decks with the boogeyman. And it kind of reminded me of horror films, right? Like, you might not know this, but it reminded me of, Blair Witch Project or that sort of thing, where they would do these sort of like, found videos or live videos kind of thing. And it kind of reminded me of that. And I really enjoyed that. So I really think this episode is going to grow on me, even though I was not quite sure at the beginning. And then there's this whole thing with Ruby and the butterfly, and that's the butterfly effect. And that comes back to this whole idea in this, series with Ruby. I mean, the butterfly effect, if you don't know what that is, I mean, I guess it's sort of like it's from chaos theory, like little changes make big differences. That's just the simplest way of thinking about it. And indeed, so she I mean, I guess to make a point of it, she turns into a butterfly kind of thing for a few seconds there. And then the Doctor keeps saying, somehow things are converging to Ruby. Somehow she's in the center of something. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, in terms of the weirdness, weirdly talking about weirdness, I was not as creeped out by the boogeyman as I was by the babies talking. I don't know what it was about that kind of made me think, oh, that's weird. But I would just have loved to be on set with all those babies. Like, how they managed to shoot this with all these babies is a mystery to me. Like, I don't know how that's how they did that. So that was pretty impressive. So yeah, I think this episode is growing on me. I feel a little bit more settled in what's happening. So I'm really looking forward to the Devil's Chord with Maestro, and somehow this is reminding me of the Toy Maker and the Giggle. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this with you and enjoying that experience as well.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that this is kind of a nostalgia episode, because I didn't know that, did not make that connection. I actually kind of, but I thought that we kind of thought a bit similarly about like our feelings with this episode. I thought it was a little bit crazy, a little bit all over the place, a little bit overwhelming. But I think in all, like, I guess everything was trying to be fit in. There was too much like going on. There was what the plot of the episode itself and the overarching plot with Ruby's heritage and the new dynamic between Ruby and the Doctor that like is all trying to be shoved into one episode. And I think that it went a little bit crazy. So I'm a little bit split about this particular episode. But I think it's kind of interesting. I'm noticing that between like this episode and the Christmas special, there's a lot of presence of babies, and there's a lot of emphasis of like the connection between like children and parents, or parents and children who specifically were like abandoned by their parents. So like with Ruby and her mother, her parents, and these babies on the ship and their parents. And I mean, in a way, almost the doctor himself, not abandoned, but like he was, I guess maybe yes, abandoned, and then he was adopted, and then of course that whole thing with Gallifrey happened. So, just the theme of like children with parents who are absent, or like birth parents who were absent, is interesting. So I'm curious to see if that's going to be a persistent thing. I think it will be, but if that's going to be a persistent thing throughout this season. I mean, I don't know, we don't know if this is a focus in past Doctor Who's, but I honestly have a feeling that this is specific to this Doctor right now, this whole theme. But yeah, I also noticed that 15 is very caring. He's like empathetic almost to a fault. Like, he was very ready to like sacrifice himself in order to save the bogeyman that was terrifying the children on the ship. And he was like, this is also a child that needs saving. So I think I have a feeling that like I think both him and Ruby both have this tendency to like be very like invested and very willing to help others, even if it comes at the expense of themselves. And I think that's a thing that probably wasn't seen all the time in both the Doctor and the companion, but especially this Doctor and this companion. Like, they seem like very, very like extroverted, very like almost like, no, I wouldn't say like go-getters or doers, but like very self-sacrificing for the like people that they barely know, like this ship full of babies that they just TARDISed into. I'm thinking that like I have a feeling that this is going to set up some kind of like big climactic thing where the Doctor is going to have to choose between his like empathetic nature, saving the world, and saving probably Ruby, more than likely, because like looking at the trailers, it looks like there's going to be some big decision that's made, probably with the big baddies that the toy maker was hinting at earlier. But I just think because the Doctor and Ruby have such like, they're very similar to each other, which is another thing like I wanted to talk about, the dynamic that those two have. You mentioned that like it felt a little bit forced. I also thought that as well. Of course, like the actor's doing a very amazing job with what they have, but I do think that right now, I think the showrunners are trying to really drive the point home that like these two really click together. And I think probably as the show goes along, it'll probably become a little bit more natural. But right now seems a little bit too familiar, I guess, given the fact that like maybe like a few hours before, Ruby was living a perfectly normal life and had no idea about any of this stuff. So it's a little bit jarring, which I really would say goes for this whole episode. Everything is a little bit, just a little bit overstimulating. But yeah, I really think it's going to be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out with the two of them being so deeply empathetic. I mean, I'm sure like in the past, like, I mean, always the Doctor has to have some kind of level of empathy, but like, I think this is very, very like very over the top, wanting to help. I will get this done. I will save everyone. And I think that the lesson that 15 is going to learn is that he can't save everyone, even if he tries really hard. And I think that's probably something that, like, even though he does say, like, oh, yes, I'm better, I'm healed, I've gotten over the extinction of my entire species, I don't think he has. And I really think that this, like, deeply empathetic nature now has developed because he still is processing things. He's still going through things, and he's trying to prevent this from happening anywhere else to anyone else in any kind of manner. And then that's another reason why he's so insistent, he's so adamant about not going back to the night that Ruby was born, even though she does specifically ask him to. She doesn't press it, but like you can tell that she wants to know. She really does want to know. She's respecting his decision to not do that, but for how long? I don't know. Will she always? I don't know. We'll see, but I think the reason he's so insistent on that, because like there's those two now like seem very, they're or at least over the process of this season, they're going to get very close. He doesn't want to accidentally ruin or completely destroy anyone's life or anyone's like world, anything like even remotely similar to what happened to him and all the other Time Lords on Gallifrey. I think so. Even though 15 does say he's okay, I don't think he is, and I think that him still like not being completely okay, but kind of almost forcing the fact that, like forcing the assertion that he is, I think that's going to get him and probably Ruby into a bit of trouble by the end of this season.
With the Devil's Chord, I really didn't need to think about whether I actually enjoyed the episode, because with Space Babies, I felt, did I enjoy that, or was that just, where was that coming from? And like I said, I do now like Space Babies. Like I said, it kind of grew on me now that I was sort of thinking about what was happening. But with Devil's Chord, I definitely liked it right from the beginning. It was just creepy with the whole interaction with the boy and the piano teacher, and then Maestro coming out of the piano, and just that whole level of monster scariness is just, I just enjoyed that. And that whole like thing about Maestro playing the first few notes of the Doctor Who theme song, just going right into that, like that was just really cool. And right to that twist at the end, I know it was really unexpected, but I totally got that. Like that was just making a whole play on how there's always a twist at the end and making light of it. And then of course giving us a twist with the boy coming back, and we had seen him disappear, but then he was back. And in terms of the episode itself, I just loved the costuming, and the whole, like the one scene that I really, really liked was when Maestro was using the tuning fork and the vibrations of that to sort of, I guess, break the silence. I guess it was silence that the Doctor was using to hide him and Ruby. So I just thought that was such a cool kind of effect, and how Maestro was just trying to figure out what was going on, and it was just really, just, I don't know what it was. It's not that it was scary, but it was just so clever. I don't know. It was just really, I just really liked that scene. And then going back to what you were saying about how the Christmas special, and then Space Babies, and this whole thing about babies and children and interactions with parents, and that actually continued in Devil's Chord, right? Because right at the beginning, I think Maestro said that boy was his son or something like that, and then Maestro was complaining later on about the toy maker being a bad daddy. So that whole thing came right back again with these weird interactions between parents and children. Like, so that's like totally like what you were saying that was going on with Space Babies. But again, like, I think that the dynamic between the Doctor and Ruby was a little bit smoother here, but it still felt a little awkward. And it just this beginning of this season reminds me of, and this is going to sound weird, but the first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, that very first episode, and the first few, the whole cast was just so awkward. I mean, I guess that makes sense, but going back and watching that first season compared to like the last season, and it was like a well-oiled machine, and you could totally tell that all these characters, or all the actors, they kind of knew exactly what they were doing, and I just feel this kind of this forcedness, in terms of what's happening with the dynamics between Ruby and Ruby and the Doctor. But then, thinking about the more serious side, I mean, there's a lot of serious stuff going on here, but you were saying that you still feel like the doctor's processing everything that happened to him, even though he's more upbeat and such than the other doctors. And that really just came out like with, when Maestro came out of the piano, when they were up and when they were playing, when Ruby was playing the piano, and he started with the toy maker's kind of like laugh, and it, just like that instant, like, bat out of hell, running away, in his panic about it. There's no way that he's going to be able to beat this, this monster, or this being that, because they're like gods, right? And he already knows that, like, and then coming back to the whole trauma about being, put into two, actually, in his effort to defeat the toy maker. So it comes back to that. But, at the end, the doctor didn't beat Maestro, right? It was the two geniuses coming together. So Lennon and McCartney, they both together had enough genius to defeat Maestro. And they sort of worked with and I just loved, that was the other thing, that chord just hanging there above the piano, and it was just still there, and they were like playing together, and they figured out the chord that would defeat Maestro. So that was kind of like an interesting ending to that, because it was actually like I was saying, it wasn't the doctor who did the final blow to Maestro. But then you wonder if he's really gone, right? Because the kid comes back. So or maybe the kid is the harbinger of doom, right? So I don't know. It's like clearly a member of that family, and I don't know if that's the one that's been waiting, or whatever, that's constantly being referred to from the toy maker to Maestro here. But yeah, I like I said, I really enjoyed this episode, and I'm looking forward to the next ones, and seeing where this is going to go. But I feel like that there's a lot of, to use your word, lore. There's a lot of lore that they can pull on now for Doctor Who, and they seem to be doing that. Like, I really get that feeling, and and this whole thing with the I guess the toy makers race, or whatever they are. I feel like that's going to be sort of permeating this season. But anyways, we'll keep watching, and we'll see where Doctor Who's going to take us next.
Yeah, actually, yet again, we're thinking a lot of the same things. I mean, I quite enjoyed this episode just because, like, I'm really into music, and one thing I noticed, well, actually two things I kind of noticed, was that in this episode in particular, there was almost no background music. There was almost none, and that was definitely intentional, and I think it was very clever that the songwriter decided to do that, have almost no music be there, because, like, both for the characters and for us, the audience, to not have that music is to kind of notice the lack of, to notice that it's not there, because normally most people, unless you're me, a lot of the time don't tend to notice the background music. But when it's not there, it's very striking, and, well, I just thought that was an interesting choice. And one thing that kept coming back to me, actually, was, I think at some point the doctor mentioned something about, like there was some music playing, and the doctor said, "Oh, I thought that was diegetic. I thought that music was diegetic." So I was like, what does that mean? Why is that there? So I looked up the meaning of diegetic, and it's an adjective meaning of the sound in a movie, television program, etc., occurring within the context of the story and able to be heard by the characters. So I think the doctor knows a little bit more about what's going on than he lets on, because, I mean, I know there's, like, a lot of, I guess, like, especially with this doctor, like, he makes a lot of, like, fourth wall breaks, like, he winks at the camera, and Maestro does that as well. They also wink at the camera and such. But I think it was interesting that this episode relied very heavily on, like, fourth wall breaks to an almost creepy extent. And I know that, I think that I don't remember quite if that happened with the toy maker, but I do believe that did happen, like, a few times in that episode, and I think it's interesting, and I would be curious to see, if when these, like, god-like characters from beyond the edge of the universe appear in Doctor Who, and the Doctor has to fight them, are there going to be more of these fourth wall breaks? And maybe, like, what would that mean, like, in universe? Because it's interesting, like, maybe they know, well, they must know that they are in a TV show or something. Because there's something going on there. There's a reason that both the Toymaker and Maestro do these things, and now suddenly the Doctor can do that too. To a certain extent. Like, he knows that something is not as it seems, but he seems to be fine with it. He seems to treat it almost as like an inside joke. I don't know, I'm probably reading a little bit too much into that, but I just think it was interesting. But yeah, this episode generally, I've had time to think about it. I do personally like it better than Space Babies, but that's just because I'm totally a music nerd. But yeah, and I think the fact that it wasn't actually the Doctor who dealt the last blow to Maestro, like, as you said, it was two of the Beatles, was, I think, just like a bit of like a funny ending to such like a very, honestly, a little bit scary, terrifying episode, but also kind of more along the theme that I'm kind of getting from this particular Doctor, that, like, sometimes you can't do it alone. Sometimes you need someone with you to help, because, like, I feel like right now, even though, or maybe because of Ruby, but, like, she's very new. Like, she's basically only been going about with the Doctor for I don't know how long it would be in that time frame, but, like, it seems to be about maybe a day or two, and she's, like, grasping things very easily, almost, like, scarily easily, because, like, I mean, I do know, like, the only really companion that we've had experience with seeing, like, bits and scenes of is Donna. She was, like, completely, what the heck is going on for a good amount of the time, but Ruby really seems to be taking everything quite in stride, even, like, stepping on a butterfly and changing, like, the entire trajectory of the human race. She seems to be taking everything very, like, in stride, and I just think it's very interesting that she's doing that, and in so doing, she's able to kind of almost, like, be on par with the Doctor, like, almost from the beginning. Like, the two of them, I mentioned, like, already in the last episode, they seem to have very similar energy. They seem to do the same things. They're very, like, in sync about things. And I think it's very interesting that is the dynamic that the showrunners have decided to have them have. And I also think, yes, like you said, and like we both said last episode, it is still a little bit awkward, but I do think I've noticed between this episode and last episode, they kind of settled in a little bit more. Maybe it's because of the gravity of the situation, but I think the characters settled, like, a little bit more into a, like, banter between each other, and it's a little bit more, like, it's a little bit less forced. It does seem a little bit odd at times, but I think that slowly the actors might be getting used to each other, the characters are getting used to each other, and that did, I think, come through. But again, and you also mentioned the fact that I mentioned before that the Doctor does seem to be healing, and yeah, like, I mean, normally, like, and I think this episode and the last episode, the Doctor mentioned that he isn't usually scared, but this episode you clearly can see he is scared of the Maestro, and he was scared of the Toymaker, and he was scared of the bogeyman in the last episode, but he is scared, and he mentions like, straight out the gate, I am not normally scared. But, like, the past two episodes, all we've been seeing is the Doctor being a little bit scared, being a little bit out of his element, and trying to adapt to the circumstances, and somewhat success, and usually not. I think the past two episodes, it's not always him completely him by himself who solves the problem. It's either not him at all or him with the help of several other people. So it's an interesting pattern that I saw. Curious to see if it's going to continue. But I think that at this point, probably because he is still trying to deal with some stuff, he needs to learn again how to rely on other people. And I think that was the lesson that 14 had to learn when he was facing the toy maker. He has to learn how to rely on other people. And I think 15 is still, yes, he's a bit better, but he is still trying to learn that lesson.
I loved Boom right from the get-go. This was excellent. I just loved it. I know that, the only thing is there's a lot of stuff going on in this one episode. But I think before I get into that, I want to go back to a couple of things that you were saying that sort of is our arc. It seems to be looking at this Doctor Who and what you brought out, and I'm not sure if I mentioned that before, but the breaking of the fourth wall. I think we're 4 for 4 now. If you also consider the Christmas specials. So now we have, the one I noticed with this episode was the ambulance breaking the fourth wall. There might have been others, but that's the one that was really obvious to me. So why that is, and why they're allowed to break the fourth wall is interesting. I don't know if this is an experiment that Russell T Davies is doing with the arc of this story, or if there's something else going on. Because being trained as an actor, breaking the fourth wall is a no-no. So this is a thing that's going on. And then the other thing is with Ruby, right? I mean, there's something going on, like what, 3,000 years old, over 3,000 years old, according to her DNA. So there's something weird going on with Ruby. I mean, one could argue that this episode is in the future because, it is Doctor Who and we've got a Time Lord, but this is on a different planet. And, there's something definitely, with this. So we also had the snowflakes coming back, and the doctor saying that this was a good thing, and I think that they were saying that the snowflakes are memories. So I'm trying to piece it all together, but I get this feeling that the doctor is starting to put the puzzle pieces together, because he did do that scan of Ruby's DNA. So I have a feeling he knows what's going on, at least has an inkling. And, in terms of that, I mean, she always seems to instinctively know what she should do. There's like an instinct that kicks in when push comes to shove. And, even though on the other hand, she's full of wonder. Like, she's on this new planet, and and she has to take a moment of awe when she sees the night sky, and so there's this, there's that aspect of her, but there's still something about her that makes her different, and how things come together with her, and I hopefully that they continue with that line so that we can understand what's happening. And then in terms of this episode, anyway, so this was written by Steven Moffat, and I looked him up because I haven't been following Doctor Who like many people have, but he used to be showrunner, but apparently he wrote this years ago, like over 2 years ago. So he has a real passion for what he's trying to put into the lesson that's coming out here. And you could tell that there's a lot of passion for it in the writing. So when you look at this, I'm still wondering, I'm questioning, what exactly the monster was here, because you could consider a whole bunch of things, right? Was it the ambulance, right? Deciding who was worth saving, whether you have the faith or not, and how bad your injury was, or was it the algorithm, anything for profit, and you're just setting up a whole system to make sure that you're making a profit. Or was it religion, right? So just basing your whole existence on a belief and not on, what is literally right in front of you, or is it capitalism, right? Like, the villain guard, guarding the villain guard corporation, you're just doing everything for profit and making sure that that's how things are running, right? Like, so which exactly was the villain, right? So it's just kind of an amalgamation of all kinds of bad stuff coming together. And so, like, what do you do? And then the disturbing imagery that we have, I mean, the caskets, we use that in bunny ear quotes, or air quotes, whatever we call that, right? So it's like, they're sort of like compressed into this little thing, and then they're distilled down into an AI to communicate with your next of kin, so and then again with this episode at the end, and even though this was not written by Russell T Davies, we have that continuity, and that the Doctor did not in the end save the day, right? I mean, it was the AI, right? It was not him that saved the day. So I think it was John. I think that was the name of the AI who ended up saving it. Yeah. So, it was the AI based on John that saved the day. Right. But even though the Doctor figured it out, I mean, he put all the puzzle pieces together, right, to do that, but he was incapable of solving the problem, but figured out how to do that, even though he was in that situation, but he could not have done it without the AI based on John. So, and so what is the lesson, right? I mean, and it comes down to the idea that war is for profit. I mean, if you look, what's going on in the world right now, I mean, war is profitable, regardless of the human cost, right? And it's like, that whole commentary that you're just setting a balance of just enough damage, and 4 weeks recovery time is just too much. We can't afford that, so we're gonna be humane and get rid of you. Like, I mean, so it's just kind of trying to think of who really or what really is the villain, and I think that this episode really did the job of really making us question everything, right? And coming back to thoughts and prayers. I mean, do something. Don't just watch and allow this to take place and understand, try to understand the situation so that, things can change. I mean, I guess that's sort of, where I'm coming at with this. And I'm still, like I said, still trying to decide, who or what exactly is the villain. And I'm almost thinking that it's, in a way it's all of us, right? So, because we're just letting these things happen, and we should try and make it stop. But, that might be making it too broad, but it really, this is why I really feel like this episode really did its job. And, it was scary in different regards, and it was thought provoking, and it continued along with the whole Doctor Who story. And, I can't think of anything that this episode was lacking. So I'm really looking forward to the next one, and I'm having a good time with this.
Well, I think the concept of this episode was very interesting, and it was yet another example of how the Doctor is, like, usually, or this doctor in particular needs help to solve, like, the problems that he's confronted with. And especially in this episode, he literally could not move at all, so he had to completely rely on all of the other characters to kind of, like, really take action, even though he was the one who ultimately figured out, like, oh, this war is completely, like, bogus, and it's just being orchestrated by a weapons company, by Villain Guard, to sell weapons and and make money. So I think, like, it was really an interesting concept, and this is the first episode that kind of almost brought into question what is the real, like, villain, the real monster, in this episode. I mean, in past episodes, it was clearly the maestro or the bogeyman. Even that one was a little bit ambiguous, but in this episode, like, really, was it the ambulance? Was it the weapons company? Was it all of the soldiers, like, just fighting for no reason? Really, what was it? And, well, it was interesting that, like, the showrunners chose to go very strongly with the social commentary of, like, how war is for profit, and that often the real villain isn't, like, either of the sides in a war. It's often the ones who are benefiting from the war without really directly fighting. But it was an interesting decision choice. Speaking of the ambulance, I really did not like that. Did not like that at all. That was very terrifying, and I mean, speaking from my own opinion, that was the main antagonist. I mean, Villengard is like some shadowy company, but the ambulance is something you can see. The ambulance is something that was killing people. It was absolutely terrifying. Did not like it at all. But really, when you think about it, and as I've had time to think about it, I came to the conclusion that, like, the ambulance and even the two human AIs were both kind of just tools. Like, they're really just kind of subject to the programming of Villengard. And in that way, like, they're almost like, I mean, the ambulance especially was, like, almost twistedly empathetic, I thought, because, like, I mean, it kept saying, like, oh, thoughts and prayers, and, like, it was being, like, oh, it was acting, like, in a very calming manner when doing these, like, terribly inhumane things, like diagnosing a 4-week blindness as something that would equate to needing to kill someone. Someone who, like, had a kid who was completely dependent on him. But it just was... this episode was very, very, very heavy for me. But, like, and also the fact that the showrunners, Steven Moffat, decided to, like, put faces to what would arguably just be a robot otherwise. Like, even the AI of the caskets, the AI of, like, the people who got killed by the ambulance, or the ambulance itself, there were actually, like, faces to the voice and to the actions, and that was honestly the biggest, like, disconcerting factor for me, because it served to almost, like, humanize and dehumanize the actions that both of these versions of AI were making, especially the ambulance. Like, if it hadn't had a face, I don't think I would have been quite as disturbed by its actions. But, like, all of the close-up shots of the ambulance's face, like the face of the woman who is acting as, like, the vessel, I guess, for the ambulance, it really very deeply terrified me, and I think that was, and, like, this episode in general was very terrifying for me, and I, like, really kind of am thinking, why did the showrunners choose to make this episode in particular one that is, like, viscerally terrifying? Especially when, like, this is the first time we've really seen characters, like, straight up die in this season. And they died. Even Ruby died, and that was terrifying for me. And it's interesting to think of why the showrunners choose this episode with these messages to be the one where, like, it really drives home the point that people can die in Doctor Who. I mean, so far it's been a little pretty, like, fantasy, and even, like, with big threats, like, it's just been like, it's okay, the Doctor solves everything in the end. But this is the one that I was thinking someone could actually die. Like, one of the main characters could actually die, and Ruby did technically kind of die for a second. And another thing about Ruby, you mentioned that, the diagnosis was that she was, like, over 3,000 years old. What is up with that? I don't think it's the fact that, like, this takes place in the far future. I think there's something more going on here, because honestly, I did not expect, like, for the ambulance to be able to scan her DNA, because she's from another planet. Like, how does Villengard have all of her, like, everything? How does it have that? I don't know if that's something that is, like, relevant to the plot. I still am not completely clear on what Villengard really is, but, like, I was honestly expecting her to not show up in the system like the Doctor did. But she did, but a few things are a little bit off, so I'm not sure if that's a red herring or not, but I feel like some parts of that, especially the fact that it diagnosed her as being, like, 3,000 years old, I think that's going to end up being significant later, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, but going back to, like, my thinking about, like, the two types of AI, the ambulance and the, both of the humans, like, both of them did originate from Villengard, but, like, I feel like the main difference is that the human AIs retained, like, they originally were human, and they retained some of their humanness, even though, like, arguably the Doctor did use the AI of, like, the father who died, as, like, in order to complete a goal. Completing the goal was to, like, break into the Villengard system and make it so that Ruby could be helped by the ambulance. And in doing so, he inadvertently kind of destroyed all of Villengard. But I don't know. I'm thinking it's just a very interesting concept that the showrunners decided to highlight the, like, AI as something that can be used as a tool both for good and for bad. Depending on who uses it. I think, like, in this day and age when, like, we're increasingly talking about AI and especially the usage of it in times of war, I think, like, yes, this episode was kind of a social commentary about how war is, like, profitable and how that is not usually a good thing, but also about how, as we move forward into the future, these new technologies can make this, like, the murkiness of the morality, I guess, of using war as profit, it can make it even more of, like, a complex conundrum. But yeah, I just this episode was, I think overall, if it hadn't terrified me so much, I probably would have liked it better. But I do think in terms of the quality of the, like, the dynamic between the Doctor and Ruby, especially right now, I think is getting a lot more natural. And overall, this one is one that I'm definitely going to be thinking about for a good long time.
I thought it was really interesting in now 73 yards coming off of Boom, and we're not dealing with AI, but you're sort of dealing with, again, technology in terms of social media, in terms of Mad Jack being, or rogerapgwilliam being really savvy with social media and ability to convince people that he's somebody he really wasn't, and he's really this monster. And, you know, with war again now, instead of, you know, dealing with the makers of the bombs, but now you're dealing with someone who wants to drop them and ends up doing that. And I think that, you know, I'm thinking about 73 yards and you know, I think I had an inkling of who the old woman was from the beginning. Like, I was thinking, I wonder if that's really Ruby, and I think it was the blonde hair that kind of made me think that. But I love the perspective at the end where, you know, sort of turn it around, where now it's the old Ruby looking at the young Ruby. And I just love the hands reaching out, because she does reach her hands out at the beginning, and it just was really interesting. And I just loved at the beginning that creepiness with that. And you know that there's something that happened because they did that whole trick with the color of the film, right? And it reminded me of that episode of, I'm so nerdy, but Stargate SG-1, where Jack O'Neill was stuck on that moon with Mayborn, and they did that whole thing while they were under the influence of that sort of the toxin from that plant that they had to eat, and they had it all with that odd color. But with this episode of Doctor Who, they just sort of switched it right away, and I was just, that reminds me of this, and it right away made me think of that. So that, and then that whole creepiness with her watching all the time, having somebody watch you as you're going through your life, and so that was really creepy. So this person's always like this, it's that certain distance away, but still watching. And then that other weirdness that they did at the pub at the beginning, I just loved that, and then how they made it into a joke. But I thought it was really interesting that they made that comment on sort of that, they called it the racism, or the way that the English look at the Welsh. And I found that a really interesting thing, because it's, not something that I would be thinking about, because I'm obviously not British, so I wouldn't know about these things. So I just thought that was really interesting. And then this whole concept of going through this loop and it being a fairy circle, right? And I kind of wondering how many times she actually went through that loop. Like, I think it's probably just the once. Because she's trying to think of, she was in Wales, 3 times? And he's like, when was your 3rd time? And, then she's trying to think about it. Was it really just 3 times? So it was just kind of like an interesting kind of thing, but there's still, I'm left with some questions, right? And you don't really know what she said, right? I mean, whatever she said, I mean, now at the end, that's Ruby, right? So what did she say that would drive her mother away and her grandmother, and locking her out of the apartment? And like, they never touch on that. They never answer that. And that kind of really bothered me. Like, and what would be so bad that she could say to make this, this insane person, quit being prime minister? And like, what could she have said that would be so convincing that would make him, just, run away? Like, and they never answer that. So that I kind of feel at a loss there. And, and I think, reflecting on the whole episode, I think it's great that Millie Gibson could hold that whole episode on her own. I did miss having ncutigatwa there, but I mean, it's great that they give this, an episode to the companion. So I think she did a fabulous job. And I mean, the whole production value is amazing. It's just, this is the thing. This is really a high budget that they have, and that for this show, it's really apparent, and the beautiful views of Wales. And I just love that, but I'm like I said, being at the end, just wondering, what she said. I would have loved to know a little bit about what she actually said, because she must know at the end, because obviously she must have said it. I mean, that's the part that I was kind of confused on, and I know probably overthinking it, and I should just let it go. But and then they never answered, why does it have to be 73 yards? At least that I could tell, right? Why 73? So I'm kind of like at the end of it. So, I mean, I really enjoyed the episode, but I think my favorite is still, like, so far this season, is the one with Maestro. I think that's still my favorite. But yeah, but I'm enjoying it, and I enjoyed this episode, but that's still my favorite. So, but yeah, so that's where I'm at right now, and so we're halfway through the season.
Honestly, 73 yards was an interesting one for me, and the fact that the more I think about, like, the logistics of, I guess it must have been a time loop that Ruby was stuck in, the more I think about the whole situation, the more questions I have, and the more questions that the showrunners, that Russell T Davies did not answer. I mean, for example, how is it possible that, like, old Ruby is seeing young Ruby, but young Ruby is seeing old Ruby, and how many times has this happened, and how, like, where did the doctor go? And any of that, all of that, and why did stepping on the fairy circle, why did breaking the fairy circle cause all of this to happen? Like, what what is going on with this episode? And also, as you said, why 73 yards? That's oddly specific, especially considering the fact that, like, we're in, like, a country that does not use yards. But yeah, the more I think about it, the more questions I have. But honestly, my idea, like you were saying, what could Ruby have said to, like, even her mom? But I was honestly actually a little bit more surprised at Kate Lethbridge Stewart and Olive, like, Unit. What did she say to them that made them completely turn tail and run and not listen to anything? But also, especially her own mother. because, like, obviously, like, she clearly cares about Ruby to a great deal. But what is it that old Ruby could have said to her mom and to all of these people that caused them to just get as far away from Ruby herself as possible? And why only Ruby? And also, like, the fact that, like, so everyone that old Ruby spoke to wanted to get, like, as far away from Ruby, like, they specifically named Ruby, like, as possible. Even the lady who was a hiker. But the Prime Minister guy, never actually, like, he never, like, and all of them, they always said, ask her, that's all they would say. They didn't really clarify who her was. I mean, we're assuming it was probably either, like, young Ruby or old Ruby, one of them, or both. But, like, it just, why would the Prime Minister guy, specifically talking to old Ruby, or old Ruby talking to him, cause him to just completely drop all the things about, like, wanting to drop nukes, make nukes, all that stuff. Because, like, it's one thing to just want to get very far away from a person, like with Ruby's mother, or, I guess, Kate, but it's another thing to completely just change everything that they're doing. So, like, I really do wonder what it is that she could have said, but honestly, I'm thinking, because, I mean, we've already established there's something different about Ruby, and, like, even, like, old Ruby in the hospital was saying to the nurse, oh, I used to make it snow, and, like, of course the nurse didn't believe her, but there is definitely something about Ruby. There's something that is not normal, and I'm still thinking about the fact that in Boom, like, the ambulance said she was over 3,000 years old. They still haven't really resolved that, so I still think there is something. I think Ruby has some kind of ability, and that might be, like, something to do with, I don't even know, making things, like, appear or happen. Like, I'm not really sure. I don't really have a solid grasp of what that could be, but, like, as far as we know that she can make it snow, and we know that usually only happens when she's having a very strong either emotion or memory, or, I guess, when she's dying. And we also we don't know if this is, like, completely, like, if this really is something solid, but we do know, or at least we think, that in some capacity she is very, very old. She's much older than, like, 20-something. So honestly, I'm thinking that whatever old Ruby is saying to all of these people is something, like, I feel like it's different to each person, and I feel like she almost can't really control it, because, like, she can't control when it snows, really. Like, it's more tied into her emotions, more than anything else. So I feel like whatever she's saying to these people that are making them, like, be extremely terrified is something that she might not be able to control. I mean, even, like, we saw, and then also another thing I just thought of, what happens to old Ruby? Like, what exactly happened at the end of this episode is the thing I'm not really quite clear on, because, like, I mean, we see from the perspective of old Ruby that she's reaching out to young Ruby, just as she did in the beginning, but then she just disappears, just like the Doctor did. Like, where are they going? What is happening? Like, is this, like, a merging of parallel dimensions or parallel timelines or something? Like, what is really going on there? But other than that, like, it just, the more I think about it, the more I'm really questioning what is going on in this episode. But I do think it's nice that they let Millie Gibson completely just carry her own episode, like, especially this early into her run as the companion. And I think she did a very good job, like, basically being pretty much a one-woman show. I think she did a pretty good job. She managed to keep the fact that, like, I thought it was especially impressive that she managed to, like, convey the fact that, yes, she is getting older, but she still is the same person. She never loses hope that she can do something to fix what happened to the Doctor, and that, like, whatever happened to her and whatever happened to the Doctor, it wasn't the Doctor abandoning her. It was something that she knows she needs to fix. She just isn't sure what it is yet. And I think, like, just that spirit of just, like, hope, and really the spirit of hope is kind of what makes Ruby such an interesting, and honestly likable character, at least for me. But I thought it was pretty well done, and even though I feel like whatever the plot itself is trying to get at, that might be a little bit over my head right now, probably would have to do a rewatch, or maybe, I don't know, look at the behind the scenes or whatever Russell T Davies had in mind for this episode, because I'm still not entirely clear on that. But I did quite enjoy it. There wasn't really anything that was especially scary per se about it, even when, like, at the end when the shadowy woman figure kept getting closer and closer to older Ruby now. That honestly didn't really scare me. Like, I sensed that, like, everything was gonna be okay. I was honestly a little bit more curious than anything, and this, especially not like the last episode. I was terrified in that one. But even though I feel like this one's just is very, it's definitely not one that, oh, you watch it once through and then, oh, you've got it, you don't need to watch it again. I think this episode is one that will benefit from more rewatching in some point in the future. But yeah, overall, I did quite enjoy it. I like the fact that that Millie Gibson was given the chance to completely just run her own episode, she was pretty much the only consistent character in the entire episode. And it was really just a nice opportunity to get to really explore, like, what makes Ruby, like, tick, like, what how does she think, what does she do in certain situations. Yeah, overall, I think I liked it quite a bit, liked it much more than the last episode, and looking forward to the next one.
And with that, those were our thoughts after watching the first 4 episodes of this season of Doctor Who. There was a lot to unpack, and I suspect that we'll have to go back and watch the episodes again to pick up on all the things we missed on our first viewing. We're excited about where things are going, so look forward to our podcast on the rest of the episodes. And as always, thank you for listening to the Birds on Power Lines podcast.